Here I am. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Speak Powerfully with Dia Bondi. I'm Dia Bondi, longtime leadership communications catalyst and coach. And today is an awesome day. It is Friday, October 8th. And guess what we did today? We launched a brand new website. Go to diabondi.com to check out all the goodies. And one of the goodies I'm going to talk about today is the first three of the 21. The 21 are the 21 things you can do to have more impact when stakes are high and your voice really matters and you're at a critical communications moment. Now, that's what this show is all about. It is about speaking powerfully. It's about tools, strategies, and very importantly, stories of and about speaking powerfully. Because while it's a fun and thrilling thing to do to know that you are stepping in your full power and speaking powerfully, it's not always an easy thing to do. So I'm going to talk to you about the first three of the 21. And then as soon as we get through that, I'm going to invite a guest onto the show, Melissa Jones-Briggs, who is a power coach. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means and what that means for you. So if you're watching this on the replay, hello, everyone. You can reach out to us at hello@diabondi.com. Now, let's talk about the first three of the 21 things you can do to have more impact in front of the room. And if you want to get these, you can just text. If you're in the US, you can text the word impact to 66866 and get the full list. Let's talk about the first three. Number one is to go first. If you want to have more impact in the room, you simply have to go first, which means nobody's going to get excited, enthralled, aghast, emotional, thoughtful, happy, enraged, surprised about anything you talk about unless you do first. You want them to pay attention to you, you need to pay attention to them. You want them to see how exciting something is, you need to actually show your excitement for it. You want to show how big something is, you need to talk about it like it's big. If you don't go first, we're going to be making up whatever we think is important about what you say. You have so much power to shape our experience of the content you're sharing if you shape it by going first with how we need to be seeing it, hearing it, feeling it, and experiencing it. Seems really easy, but here's the thing. Nobody likes to go first. But if you go first, that means everyone else gets to be a first follower and get on board with what you're trying to say in the way that you're trying to say it. Thing number 2 in the 21 things to have more impact in front of any room is to parachute in. That means you're making your first words your best words. You're not going to do what I did today at the top of this show, where I did a little bit of like, here's where the bathrooms are, and my name is, and all of those sort of logistical things that are very easy to start with when you're stepping in front of a really critical audience. And I don't mean a big audience, I mean a critical audience. But instead, you parachute right in with an important statement that sets the tone and sets the stage for what you're going to say next. So I want you to parachute right on in. Thing number 3. And the 21 things you can do to have more impact in front of the most critical audiences in your career, business, etc., is to care. Seems super obvious, but like thing 1, to go first, if you don't care, we're not gonna. If you don't make it clear to us that you care, we're not gonna. But here's what's really critical here is that if you really recognize how much you care about that particular moment and you actually invest that caring in that moment, you'll find that there's freedom in that. Because if you care enough to let go of your plan and go where your audience wants you to go, it actually puts you in control. If you care enough to stop the show and talk about what really needs to be talked about because something new came in, then you're gonna stay in control because you're not caring about controlling the room. You're staying in control of the moment, which means staying upright, which means caring enough to be flexible enough to do what needs to be done to get the outcome that you're really looking to have. So those are the first 3 of the 21 things you can do to have more impact in front of the room. If you'd like to get that, you can do it by going to diabondi.com or by texting the word impact to 66866. Am I just like, I feel like I'm like, hey, get it now, but you should get it now because it's actually a fairly useful tool. So I'm going to invite now onto the show a good friend and colleague of mine, Melissa Jones Briggs. Melissa Jones Briggs is coming to us right now live from the Stanford University campus, where she teaches a class called Acting with Power. And she is here to talk to us today about something that is very common and I sort of have a point of view about, which is executive presence. Hi, Melissa.
Hey, Dia. Great to see you. Thanks for having me. It's great to join your conversation.
I love having. Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh. It's like, seems like not a big deal. Like, oh, it's a website, whatever. It's copy and images. But I'm going to tell you what is crazy about this website project is it was, in essence, was like, was basically me speaking powerfully on behalf of the impact that I want to have in the world. And it, in a lot of ways, just the process of cohering a body of work and getting clear about what impact you want to have in the world was putting myself and my team in the position that a lot of our clients are in, you know, getting clear about not just the content of what we want to say, but what the truth is about ourselves in what we are about to say. So it was a crazy exercise. Melissa, you are coming usually, or these days you're outside of London. Is that correct?
Yep. I'm splitting my time between California and London to the extent that the pandemic allows, of course.
Yes, that's great. And you're here because you're here in San Francisco, you're on the Stanford campus right now because?
Yeah, we're midterm teaching a course. I teach a course called Acting with Power, where we pair emerging research from the social sciences with performance techniques from the theater. So we're looking at emerging and leading research in navigating complex power dynamics from experimental social psychologists and bringing together the art of leadership, performance from the performing arts, millennial crafts of performing with power from the stage. And so we are 6 sessions in on a 9-session course, an intensive. Yeah,
and it's a really popular course, Acting with Power. It's like sells out every time. When I say sells out, I mean there's a waiting list pretty much.
Yeah, our waiting lists are long. It's really hard to turn students away.
Yeah, I know. So I wanted to invite you today to talk with me about speaking powerfully because you are a power coach. And in fact, I brought you in to work with some of my clients. We've collaborated on a few projects together as well. And, you know, this idea of acting with power or using power sort of willingly and willfully in a moment, I think is a really important aspect of speaking powerfully, and is something I think we often underestimate or shy away from doing because we somehow perceive it as manipulation or something else. Like, what kinds of assumptions do students and clients that you work with bring to the idea of using power intentionally?
I think the biggest assumption that I notice with students and executives is, first of all, ignoring the fact that they all, assuming they're not already making calibrated choices about how they're showing up, that they're not already choosing their costume, they're not already choosing their blocking, to use a theater term, their movement through space. And so often the biggest hurdle initially is raising awarenesses around the signals around power and status, authority, the signals of dominance and deference, warmth and cool behavior that they're already showing. And so I often begin by looking at those stories that we're telling immediately when we walk in the room as we begin to speak, and then embracing the right that we have, the responsibility that we have to show up as ourselves responsibly in our roles in service of others, which is how a trained actor thinks about their role. It's not about faking it until you make it or become it. You already are it. Yeah, you're it. And you deserve the right and you have the responsibility to calibrate the signals you're sending in order to get it done.
That's awesome. So I find that, you know, I work with a lot of founders who are just realizing how much power they have, both just in their just the power that they have and they can use as an untitled human, just as a
Yes.
person on others, but also the extra power that comes with the titles that they have as founder CEO. Up until now, they've been maybe a team lead or a function lead, and now they're actually running their own companies, and they're walking around the world with the CEO label on their backs.
Mm-hmm.
And that in and of itself has, some you're walking into a room that already has
Inherent power. I mean, you have, and that gives you, whether you want to admit it or not, structural power in the organization, right? So the hierarchy, even when we believe we're creating an equitable or flat organization, that we can't escape the real organizational hierarchies, but also the social hierarchies that exist, and that there's a responsibility to show up with full awareness,
Yes.
as much awareness as you can, about how those responsibilities read to others.
Yes, that's great. Yeah. So, folks may never meet you, but just your name and bio, or your name and title lays a context in which you then speak with dialing up or dialing down aspects of power that you have control over outside of your title, which are
Yes.
things like what?
Well, we can think first just on the around dominance and deference, right? So we think often around power. Students, you asked about assumptions earlier on. Students and executives often think when we're talking about acting with power, that's always about powering up and like signals of dominance. But of course, there's great power in the ability to defer as well. And so often, when you've made it so far in your career and you're good, everything's going well, what's gotten you there is not likely to be able to keep you there or fill the role, your next role. And so signals of dominance and deference around playing your power up, so those more expanded postures that you hear around the power posing, taking up space, slowing down, talking smoothly, moving smoothly, using your full breath, using silences. Those signals of powering up are really helpful to own the room. But the ability to switch between the two is the real agility required often for leaders, of course.
So folks come to me. So I do communications work, not necessarily, I'm not a power expert like you are, but folks come to me with a request. I'm sure they come to you with similar requests too. I get two. I get one from a trusted lead in an organization that says, "Hey, I have somebody on my team who's amazing and is just really accelerating in the organization, and they are really in the need of more presence, more executive presence." Or I have an individual who comes to me after feedback they've gotten from their investors or from the market or from their trusted partners or from their board that says, you really could work on your executive presence. What is that?
Yeah. I think, who is that? Who is the executive? And so if we're talking often some of that negative feedback around communication style or executive presence comes from a very narrow view of what leaders look like and should act like, right? And of course, those behaviors that are growing and expanding as we see more and more, thank goodness, diverse leaders in positions of power. So often,
right? Like, so just to jump in on that. So you're saying that our profile, the archetype that we imagine in our minds to fulfill that sort of executive role is being a little challenged because we actually have a more diverse set types in executive roles.
Mhm.
So yet still I get this request.
Mhm. And so I think this for the leader coming in and doing this work, growing into role, we want to explore very specifically what they're bringing, what the role is, what is the context of the role within which they're performing, and what are the responsibilities, who are the stakeholders. And by getting very, very specific about all of the details around the role, only then can they step in and bring their full selves to that role. Now, it requires range and agility in order to play those roles well and in service
Authentically, yeah.
of and ethically, and in service of the needs of the group. I mean, that's why you're there. Now, there's an aspect of when I say responsibility, it's not like we just show up authentically and just be ourselves as it feels good and feels natural. That's nice, but it's not always what's required, right? So when leaders are looking to grow their own range, they're also often looking to grow the range of expected behaviors for, say, women in leadership, for example, right? So,
Yeah, sorry, I want to jump in and say that this is like what I hear then is that when people say, I want to work on my executive presence.
well, often I think they're asking, right, about that
How do
assertive
I
male
be?
leader stereotype.
Yes.
Still, uh,
Yes.
and
But are the inside of that, isn't there that question of like, how do I be in these different contexts? What is it begging of me?
mhm,
Well, what do I have in me that works to create the outcomes that the business needs, that my team needs, that the initiative we're working on needs, that like how my voice can be in service in that moment because it's a new context. So
mhm,
it's not about, even though there's a craving to be like, I need to have executive presence, inside of that is like, how do I grow my range of behaviors
mhm.
that meet the need of a particular context and leadership expectation? It's
Yes,
not like, where do I put my hands?
exactly.
How exactly shall I tilt my head to one side to look interesting and presence? Like how would you even know you have executive presence?
Yeah.
Because other people tell you, not because you feel it. Let me tell you, working with a bunch of executives myself, rarely do they say, you know what I'm good at? Executive presence.
In the performance arts, we think about presence as channeled energy. And so often, I think when we take on roles that we care about deeply and want to do well, we can get that energy can get lost on self-focus. And
Ooh,
we're worried
yeah.
about doing well, and then you get this inner monologue going, and then you're worried about how you're showing up and where you put your hands, instead of channeling that energy and that focus on the other, on the stakeholders in the boardroom, on your team, on the task, on the objective. And so we'll often explore exercises of that to practice that shifting, that attention and that focus, that inner monologue from the self, to channel the energy into presence, meaning being present with what is real in the moment, and then showing up, acting, taking action in order to further your objectives and advance your organization or team's objectives.
Based on what's actually going on in the room, not what's going on in your mind.
Yes.
So the key term that you just brought up here that that hit me was this idea of like attention. Because if I tell somebody, oh, you just have to channel your energy, people wouldn't know what to do.
Right.
But for sure, if you told me, if you asked me, where is your attention? That's a question I could answer. I couldn't tell you where my energy is,
Mm-hmm.
but I sure as hell could tell you where my attention is. And where your attention is potentially where your focus is, which is where your energy is.
And it can be very specifically your visual attention in a room. I mean, that itself is very powerful. And there's a beautiful book by my colleague Deborah Gruenfeld. She wrote a book called Acting with Power that describes this technique around having a clinical focus, but a curious gaze, and using the practices of visual attention in order to channel that presence. Often we'll explore practices of mindset and how we're using our internal attention in order to focus or channel our presence, and that can backfire too if you're not intentional.
I really live in this space between being and doing, like who you be and then what you do with who you be.
Mhm.
And, this is what people come to when I hear about executive presence. And, to be honest, whenever I see a workshop on executive presence, like the word that comes to mind right away is bullshit. Because I'm not sure that everyone even knows when they walk into that room what they're asking for, really. And it's probably tied to like, who am I supposed to be? And what you're saying is that there are things you can actually do that are aligned to who you be, but are very tactical,
Yes.
like and you don't even have to feel like it doesn't even have to feel authentic for it to be experienced as such.
Yeah. What's important is that you care authentically. That's another. Who is it? Bob Joss, I believe, said that, and it was quoted in our class by one of my colleagues. It's important to. It's not important to act authentically, but it's important to care authentically. And if that intention and the objectives are channeled, focused on the other, the rest will follow. And there's a job to do. I mean, it's your job.
Yeah, I think that's the piece of it, is that we haven't demystified or broken down or had any published. We think of executive presence as a set of attributes, not a set of behaviors.
Yeah. Yes. Things put on from the outside. Again, it's like like a mask you'd put on. Whereas in fact, we know the best leaders can unmask, but show up fully in service of the other and appropriately for the organization.
Not as a confessional,
of
right?
that moment. Yes. Yes. Right. It's not permission. Authenticity is not permission to, go nuts, to relinquish responsibility for the actual needs of the others, of the rest of the cast, if you will.
Excellent. I love this. And I think that, when folks who rewatch this live stream are looking for executive presence, they're looking to, they get feedback about executive presence, to not just rush out and ask for that exactly, but instead ask the question, if I were having executive presence, what would I be doing?
Yeah. What would I be doing? And as me, who's the executive? Not some idea of some vague, generalized role, but very specifically, what is my role and who are my people and what do I need to do to serve them?
Yeah.
And then the rest will follow.
What happens in Acting with Power, the class that you teach at Stanford? What happens when folks start to experience how to use power behaviors? I don't know if even that's the right term, but power behaviors to signal, these different things we can do to power up or to power down, right?
Yeah.
What do students start to experience, and what kind of reactions do they have when they start to do it?
I think initially it's a little bit like bias. When once you see it, you can't unsee it, and then you see it everywhere. By isolating some of the behaviors around powering up and powering down, signals of connection and disconnection, warmth or cool. By isolating those and teasing apart what they mean in this culture or in this culture, you start to see them everywhere. So at first it's destabilizing, I think, for students and executives. And then the question does turn inward. So how have I been socialized to show up in these ways? How is it working for me? Which are habits that I have control over and which are habits that I don't have control over? And where's my area of growth? Like, how can I grow my range in actually doing the thing? I mean, it can be impossible, for instance, early in my career, and I still have it. I was like a perma smiler, right? Like it's just like this permanent smile. I was supposed to be a good girl and my voice was even higher. And it took a long time for me to let the idea of that go, but then actually let my face rest. And it's a habit over time. And so the practice of exploring outside of my comfort zone, a new piece of range, behavioral range for me, gives me a new way to show up in service of others. So that's an example. And then we play with very specific behaviors and look at the cascade of other behaviors that come along with it, and calibrate how it might help in certain, especially high stakes scenarios where there's a complicated power dynamic.
So do you find that students get scared when they start to notice how powerful they are or can be?
Yes. Yeah. And they're startled sometimes that what they thought of is not aligned with what is, that their internal experience of, say, a certain behavior is not aligned with the external perception, of how they're showing up. And so that can be beautifully destabilizing and also really empowering.
I'm sure. And so where do they, like, once folks experience a few ways in which they can intentionally guide power, use it to elevate their executive presence, or to gain some presence that is in service of the moment and aligned to who they truly are.
Mm-hmm.
Once they start to sense that, what's the very first thing outside of a classroom setting should they do? What's the first place for them to go? Because there's one thing to experiment in it in a lab scenario. It's another one to be sitting, on a call and making choices about whether you interrupt somebody or not intentionally, making choices about, live in a room, whether you close the space or open it to others, all of those small power choices.
It's important to play in low stakes situations first as you're growing range. So with trusted partners, colleagues, in public, gently in public. I'm ordering a coffee. A dear colleague of ours, a phenomenal theater director, Kate Kostopoulos, describes, for instance, practicing the perma smile thing. Try ordering a latte, please, without this. Right. So but like by trying in low stakes situations, you can gain range and grow, and ask peers, trusted peers, for feedback. And of course, it helps to have a common language around power, what that means, and a very clear view of your objectives and what you're trying to do for who.
And so when you're practicing these out in the wild, do you recommend that folks find those, they're asking for feedback from people who know what they're practicing, or to practice them without their colleagues knowing and then later saying like, hey, I did something different in that meeting. What'd you think?
I think both are valuable as long as it's aligned with your objectives and focused on the needs of the moment and the other person. Both are valuable because you're getting real-time feedback all the time too.
Fantastic. Melissa, we're going to have you. Thank you so much for joining us today
Thank
on
you.
Speak Powerfully with me, Dia Bondi. And I am I'm thrilled to know that we are expecting for you to be on the Dia Bondi Show, a big podcast for women with goals, where we will continue to talk about power and how we can use it to have the impact we want in a way that's aligned to our goals and the outcomes we're trying to create in the world in service of the people that we reach those goals with. Where can folks find you, Melissa?
Oh, yeah, I'm on LinkedIn or anywhere. You feel free to put them in touch with me, Dia.
Okay, great. Well, folks can connect with you on LinkedIn. If you're interested in looking at the class taught at Stanford called Acting with Power, you can find that online as well. I think there's also content all over the internet tied to Deb Grunfeld's work around this. And so people can search that as well. If you are tuned in today, I hope you'll tune in again next week. We're gonna have 3 more Speak Powerfully's with Dia Bondi next week. Second week in October, in celebration of our brand new website at diabondi.com. And we'll be talking more about the other 21 things you can do to have more impact in front of the room. Melissa, it was a joy having you with us today.
It's great to be here. Congratulations.
Thanks.